Hi, welcome to Narkis Street Bible Study for May 8th, Shabbat, 2021. And we are in Luke. We are now in Luke 12, verses 35 to 48. And you could title it Be Ready, and then I could just turn off this recording. But we're going to look at these verses and kind of chew over all the words and images and see if we don't just get a little bit more juice out of it, added meaning. So I'll just start with prayer. Lord, thank you for this group, anyone else who would listen to this all over this world. I thank you for your word and how it comes alive when we sit and talk about it together. And I pray you'd give us your spirit, help us understand how to live and be like you, and just teach us what you want to teach us. In Jesus' name, amen. So what I think we will do is read it little chunks at a time tonight instead of reading the whole passage up front. And maybe I could ask a reader if someone wants to read just Luke 12, verse 35 to 40. Someone want to do that?
I'll do that.
Okay.
Be dressed ready for service and keep your lamps burning, like men waiting for their master to return from a wedding banquet, so that when he comes and knocks, they can immediately open the door for him. It will be good for those servants whose master finds them watching when he comes. I tell you the truth, he will dress himself to serve, will have them recline at the table, and will come and wait on them. It will be good for those servants whose master finds them ready, even if he comes in the second or third watch of the night. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. You also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him.
Okay. Well, thank you. So this starts out with this nice little biblical idiom, gird your loins. And we have it several places in the New Testament. But to me, it really harks back to the Hebrew Bible. We have it plenty of places there. And really, any culture where people are wearing kind of long robes, you'd expect to have this idiom, because basically, if you're getting ready to run, or if you're getting ready to walk seriously or do any kind of serious movement, you're going to have to do something with all those billowy robes. And so you tuck it in. You tuck it in to your belt, and that gives you more freedom of motion. So as I was reading, gird your loins, I just decided to go back and find, for instance, the osphiris. Osphiris is this word in Greek that is waist or loins. It can be both. It's often a euphemism as well. Future generations come out of the waist. And so I thought we'd look at some places in the Hebrew Bible you also find this. So one of the first places is Exodus 12:11. And that's, of course, in the Pesach, in the Passover, the first Passover story. And it's telling you how you should eat the Passover. And it says, like this, you should eat it. Your waist bound up or girded. And girded, I don't even know. Nobody uses these words in English anymore, but we all kind of know them from the King James Version. The problem is these days we don't have the same technology for dressing. as the text we're reading about. And I certainly don't have to gird myself at all. Maybe we used to have girdles that would like tighten women's waists, at least. I don't think men wore girdles.
Sharon, the German word for the belt is the Gürtel also. It's a similar word.
Yeah. So I'm sure goes back to the English we have, goes back to Old English or Germanic source of, I don't know where waist comes from, but we often have two words, one more Germanic, one more Latin based. Yeah, so gird just means to tie up, lachgor. Actually today in Hebrew, you still say lachgor, to put on a belt. You kind of put on a belt, you tighten up. And so it's an action. And so you tie up your waist, and presumably you're tying up these billowing robes inside the waist belt that you'd be wearing anyway. Like if you have an under tunic and an over, longer robe, you're going to have a waist belt to kind of keep everything in place. And then you would tighten it and maybe add in the corners that would get a bit out of control as you walk or run. So in the Exodus context, it says, this is how you're supposed to eat this Passover meal, with your waist girded and your shoes on your feet or sandals on your feet. So in the Net Bible, it says, this is how you are to eat it, dressed to travel. So everyone's now, taking this metaphor and translating it according to the context and what it means. So in this case, they're translating, you eat the Passover dressed to travel, your sandals on your feet and your staff in your hand. You are to eat in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. So
struck me, Sharon, in my version, I've got your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, your staff in your hand. You eat it in haste. It had a real sense of urgency and readiness. Get organized, right. Get it together, get your skirts up,
Urgency and definitely. And of course, every time you have a metaphor, you can look at opposite metaphors. And from the contrast, it gives you meaning. Like in any language or any communication, what you say is always surrounded by what you didn't say. The picture you see is surrounded by the background. And so that the contrast can add to the meaning. Another interesting one, some of us may not have read recently, is 1 Kings 2:5. And it also mentions waist and feet. And this is David. 1 Kings, let's just look there. I remember it being interesting. 1 Kings 2:5. Okay, I'm going to pull up the English as well. So, okay, so this is David when he's dying, and he's telling his son to take care of business. This is like the Godfather. And he says, you know what Joab, son of Zeruiah, did to me, how he murdered 2 commanders of the Israelite armies, Avner, son of Ner, and Amasa, son of Yeter. During peacetime, he struck them down as if in battle. When he shed their blood, he stained the belt on his waist and the sandals on his feet. Do to him what you think is appropriate, but don't let him live long and die a peaceful death. Huh. So, it was interesting to me when he said, when he shed their blood, he stained the belt on his waist and the sandals on his feet. And so I got this impression that the belt and the sandals were like another word picture for his character. Like he was so quick to shed blood, right? It makes him look like he's this bloodthirsty, like rash, quick kind of person. And so again, you have the belt and the sandals like associated with readiness to do something, a quickness to do something, and a lot of action. In this case, bad action because you're killing someone. So those are the 2 places I was thinking about in the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible. And then, of course, we have other places in our New Testament as well. If you think of Ephesians 6:14, putting on the armor, it says, stand firm, therefore, by fastening, using the same word for fastening, by fastening the belt of truth around your waist. And actually, it just says by fastening truth around your waist. And the metaphor there is that truth itself is your belt. It is what holds it all together. And by putting on the breastplate of righteousness, and you know the phrase well. So the same thing of fastening, tying yourself up with something. And then in 1 Peter 1:13, I really like this one. Because it says, therefore, I'm going to read you, this is the net version. Therefore, get your minds ready for action by being fully sober, and set your hope completely on the grace that will be brought to you when Jesus Christ is revealed. Like obedient children, do not comply with the evil urges you used to follow in your ignorance, but like the Holy One who called you, become holy yourselves in all your conduct. So that phrase that's been translated here, get your mind ready for action, is literally, it says, gird the waist of your mind. So for those who didn't know your mind had a waist, it does. I thought that was a nice little image applied to the mind, because, you know, mind is this abstract thing, and then you're putting a very visceral subject to it. Clearly, this image here, as you see in the translation, is being used as a readiness for action. I think that's a very nice translation, even if it's not as poetic as gird the loins of your mind.
I've got brace your minds for action.
Brace your minds for action. Yeah, no one quite wanted to say your mind had a waist. But I like that. I mean, it kind of, these little things can help you remember sometimes as well.
But it's linked, isn't it, in the Peter verse to the Lord's coming?
Yes, and also to being sober. And we're going to get to more of that.
Yeah.
So in these first 5 verses, we have this need to be ready, and not just ready, but kind of like a runner is ready on ready, set, go kind of thing. You're all completely ready to go, and you're just waiting. And I think the keep your lamps burning is also a very nice image, because, as you know, fire just kind of keeps on going. You know, as long as you're feeding the fire, it's kind of this image of ongoingness, where you're in this state of readiness, but it's not like a one-time thing. It's just like a continual, over a lot of time, that your lamps have to keep burning. And of course, Jesus uses this in parables elsewhere. We have a lot of parables of him about weddings. Of course, there's weddings, there are kings, masters, and slaves. And I think a lot of times it's harder for us these days to put ourselves, or to understand the impact of the parables, because we don't live with masters and slaves, at least certainly not overtly, certainly not the way that he's describing. And so it's a little bit further out for us to be able to identify with. But so we have these lamps burning, we're all dressed, ready to go, or ready for action, and then we're waiting for our master to come back from a wedding celebration. And if you remember Samson's wedding celebration, who remembers how long that one was?
Samson's, oh glory, no.
Samson. Do you remember how long his celebration was for his wedding?
Was it a week or more? I can't remember.
A week.
It was a week.
And depending how you interpret Jacob, when Jacob gets Leah and he's surprised in the morning that it's Leah, not Rachel. And then, Laban says, oh, well, we can't give the younger one before the older one. Finish out this one's Shavua.
Yeah.
This one's 7. This one's week. And so maybe that was also referring to a week-long wedding celebration. And then you can have the other one in exchange for another 7 years of service. So presumably the advance payment would be the woman, and then he'd pay it off in another 7 years. But the point I'm trying to make is that a wedding feast can be 7 days. It can be a week. That's a little bit longer than our wedding feasts, I think, even the extravagant ones among us. Unless maybe you do a destination wedding where you have very few guests and you all go to some island and I don't know, maybe you combine it with a tour. But even in Jesus' day, there would be days of feasting. And I'm not an expert in it, but the point is that you wouldn't know. Just because he's at a wedding doesn't mean you know when they're going to come back. You don't even know what day it is. And you don't know what time of the day your master might come back either. All right, so the whole point is that you don't know when he's going to come back, but you're immediately there to open the door for him when he knocks. And it says, blessed are those slaves whom their master finds alert when he returns. And this word alert, we're going to hear it again down in the passage to come. Gregorundas here. You know, Gregorian, that whole Greek, well, it's an English word from the Greek. It's waiting. It's like being awake as opposed to falling asleep. I mean, there's different ways you can say to be awake, but this is one of them that's kind of like anticipating. You're being awake. And then he flips it and says, I tell you the truth, he will dress himself to serve. The master himself will serve and have them take their place at the table and will come wait on them. So that would be a very surprising image if the master who's just been feasting all of a sudden comes home and becomes a slave essentially and takes a slave who was waiting and they become the person who sits down at the table. So it's like a shock finish, and it's very nice. It's a promise for that good servant, you know. And even if he comes in the second or third watch of the night, and depending how you calculate it, this could be anytime from 9 to 3 in the morning or 10 to 6 in the morning. But basically, we're talking about pitch darkness and sometime in that when it feels like the middle of the night. And so even if he comes in the middle of the night and he finds them alert, blessed are those slaves. Okay. And the word alert there is just, he says, he finds them like this, referring to this word, staying awake. And it's interesting, as I was reading through these texts, there's several of the Greek words to stay awake, and it's always in English, alert, 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 alert. And I was thinking, well, like, do we have other words in English for alert? I don't know. So if you can think of one, you can suggest it.
Watchful.
Yeah, but watchful would be like, in some contexts it could be. But
on the ball.
On
Be
the
ready.
ball.
On the ball.
Ready. But like alert, like even when you go, like when Jesus, I was thinking a lot about Jesus and his disciples, you know, before the crucifixion, and he keeps asking them, can't you stay awake?
Vigilant.
Can't you stay alert for even a little bit to pray? And so this contrast of sleeping and alertness, and it's always the alertness that is the praised position, which I, of course, find difficult because I like sleep. You know, sleep is so refreshing. It's hard to stay alert. And I imagine, you know, if you have a nighttime shift, I suppose you could get used to it, but it's very hard to stay awake all night. This is something you have to fight. It's not comfortable. It doesn't just come naturally. there's like this constant tendency to fall asleep. I was telling a friend recently of driving in a car. We were actually on our way to Holland, Michigan after taking a long flight. And it was silly of us because we had a long flight to New York, another short flight to Detroit. And then we decided to rent a car and drive to Holland. And we were both just falling asleep. It was crazy. And I had to, do what they do here, not to fall asleep when they're praying. They do this movement back and forth.
Davening.
Yeah, and I remember thinking this was a terrible idea. But
It's not that far. It's only 35 minutes. But anyhow.
From where?
From the airport in Grand Rapids to Holland, Michigan.
No, not Grand Rapids. Did I say Grand Rapids?
Yeah.
Detroit.
Oh yeah, that's long. That's too long. Yes, you shouldn't have done that. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't interrupt you.
No, I think I could have made 45 minutes an hour. That would be fine, but I switched on and off.
That's a long way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyhow.
Thankfully, God was gracious to us and we arrived at our destination. And these were in the days before anybody really had cell phones as well. But, anyone who's driven before in that condition knows how hard it is to fight sleep, when it's really in the middle of the night. And so I was thinking about that as well, as we're reading these texts, that it is really a struggle. And so to stay alert, you really have to have a good reason to do so. If you're not totally convinced like this is super important, you're just going to drift off to sleep. And the only reason I stayed alert was because I knew if I fell asleep, I'd die. I'm in a car and I'm driving. And even knowing that, you can fall asleep, So for us, maybe in our days, instead of a master and a slave, we may relate more to driving a car and feeling very, very tired. But
I've got some synonyms.
You got some synonyms for alert?
Yeah, I cheated. I went to the SARS website. Vigilant.
Vigilant, yeah. That is a sense too where you're waiting for something. I like that.
Yeah. Wary, watchful, active.
How about focus?
How about what?
Focused, to keep your attention. Or
focused. Yeah.
Focus.
Yeah, focused.
Yeah, focused is good.
On one's toes. On your toes. Whatever. On the ball.
See, that's a nice metaphor too, because to be on your toes means you're ready for action. That's like saying gird your loins, be on your toes. And then he says this, understand this, if the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. You also must be ready. And they use a different word for ready here. They use a regular word for ready. You also must be ready because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. And this was interesting as I was reading it. It doesn't actually use the word expect here. It uses doki, which can be to seem to be something, or you can suppose. You can either say it seems to me, and you use that word, or I suppose, or I think. And so to me, it kind of caught me at a different angle to think about it that way. A time when it doesn't seem like it. He can come at a time it doesn't seem like it. And so many people, it always seems like it to them. So you wonder when that time could be that nobody thinks it seems like it. But even when it really doesn't seem like it's going to happen, he may come. And then I'll have somebody read maybe the rest of, let's go ahead and read from verse 41 to 48. Beth, I think you were going to volunteer to read. Would you like to read those?
Yeah, sure. Verse 41, 48.
Yeah.
Then Peter said to him, Lord, do you not speak this parable only to us or to all people? And the Lord said, who then is that faithful and wise steward, whom his master will make ruler over his household, to give them their portion of food in due season? Blessed is that servant from whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Truly, I say to you that he will make him ruler over all that he has. But if that servant says in his heart, my master is delaying his coming, and begins to beat the male and female servants and to eat, drink, and be drunk, the master of that servant will come on a day when he is not looking for him, at an hour when he is not aware, and will cut him in two and appoint him his portion with the unbelievers. And that servant who knew his master's will and did not prepare himself or do according to his will shall be beaten with many stripes. But he who did not know yet committed things deserving of stripes shall be beaten with few. For everyone to whom much is given, from him much will be required. And to whom much has been committed, of him they will ask the more.
Okay, this is nice. There's a lot of little things going on in here. And I was wondering, this question, where does this question come from? Why does Peter care? Like, Lord, are you telling this parable for us or for everyone? It's a very interesting question. And so then, of course, you have, well, who is the us? It's not Peter alone. So the natural supposition is it's the disciples. And who is the everyone? Is it all the other people out there, with which in Jesus' day, their next broadest circle would be, fellow Jews? Or is it everyone, like everyone on the earth? And so it interests me to know what Peter was trying to figure out here. And I mean, maybe it's a suggestion that he wouldn't know the hour. Maybe that's what sparks him. Wait, are you talking to me, to us, or to everybody else, kind of thing? And he's making it a bit more of a dichotomy. And I love how Jesus answers, because typical Jesus fashion, Peter basically says A or B, and then Jesus starts telling a story. He doesn't say A or B, but he alludes to both. And I think he basically says both. But he gives it in more of a little mini sermonette. And so who then is the faithful and wise manager? You had steward, I have manager, which both good words. And
Sharon,
obviously, yes.
if you look at the parallel version in Mark 13:37, he says, I say to everyone, watch.
Yes.
So he's addressing the nation, because we know that he came first to the people of Israel, then to the world. So he's saying to them, watch for your Messiah.
I found that very interesting. Yeah, it's like Mark is answering Luke's question.
Yeah.
We can just read that. I'll read it to you really quick. Mark 13, I'll start 32. But as for that day or hour, no one knows it, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, except the Father. Watch out. Stay alert. And those two words are actually different than ours. Different alerts. This one is more like, don't go to sleep. For you do not know when the time will come. It is like a man going on a journey. He left his house and put his slaves in charge, assigning to each his work, and commanded the doorkeeper to stay alert. And that one is the same word we have. Gregore. Stay alert then, Gregorite, because you do not know when the owner of the house will return, whether during evening, at midnight, when the rooster crows, or at dawn. So now we have a different division of the night. Or else he might find you asleep when he returns suddenly. What I say to you, I say to everyone, stay alert. So that's interesting. And obviously, Jesus is talking to his disciples before he dies. And he's asking them to stay alert. And so they are not thinking of a second coming at this point. In fact, I don't know what they might be thinking, but they are understanding that they need to stay alert for everything. And then it's interesting that during this same scenario of the whole the passion leading up to the crucifixion is when they all actually fall asleep. So it's like symbolically they all really mess up because they're kind of like breaking this very clear advice. But yeah, it is very interesting how it says, what I say to you, I say to everyone. So not just you, presumably my disciples, but everyone.
I was just thinking to relate it to today with pandemic and numbers and bracelets and things being forced on us. We should be more alert now because we think we're closer to the end times, but yet we may fall asleep, and I'm getting sleepy right now even, you know, but
well,
God
I would say always stay alert. And in case people are wondering if you're in the end times or not, Paul told us 2,000 years ago, we are in the end times. So absolutely, for sure, we are in the end times, and we have been for 2,000 years.
Right.
So that's what we know.
Maybe a bit more now, a bit more, but who knows?
Well, it's always a bit more, right? Every day is a bit more.
Every day, every day.
Whether it's a bit more out of the next 30 seconds or a bit more out of the next 500 years, I don't think we can know that.
A bit more Israel
I think
becoming a nation, a bit more, yeah.
I think according to these texts, they're describing something that you're not going to know, which is a very interesting thing, because I think a lot of people interested in the second coming don't really take these verses to heart. They're always trying to figure out when it is so that they can sleep, I guess, and just wake up right at the moment. I don't know. But it does say in Mark 14:37, when he found them sleeping, you know, when he's praying, he said, you stay awake for 1 hour. Stay awake. And he uses the same word, be alert, regorite, and pray that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And it's interesting, he contrasts those two, staying alert and falling into temptation, as kind of like two sides of a coin, because I think our First Peter texts also did that, did they not?
Our common phrase these days is watch and pray. Watch and pray.
Yeah. For the First Peter text I read, 1 Peter 1:13, when it says, gird your minds, it says, being fully sober, and set your hope completely on the grace that will be brought to you when Jesus Christ is revealed. And do not comply. It's like, don't form yourself to a pattern of these evil urges that you used to do when you were living in ignorance. And so you also have a lot of this same theme that Jesus had when he was praying, you know, pray so that you don't fall into temptation, so that you don't fall into these patterns that will just lead you astray, basically. Whether you want to think about that metaphorically as sleep, or sometimes this is contrasted with drunkenness, like fully sober. I see that I didn't write down all the texts I was looking at, but as you know, there are many. This is not something that comes together only once. It's quite often that alertness is contrasted with drunkenness. And of course, we all know that sleep deprivation makes you act like you're drunk as well. In fact, I've been told it can be equally, if not more dangerous to drive sleepy than driving drunk.
Sharon,
Yes.
I've got a good, a few lines from Paul in Thessalonians. You are all children of light, children of the day. We are not of night or darkness. So let us not sleep as others do, but let us keep awake and be sober. For those who sleep, sleep at night, and those who get drunk are drunk at night. And so you can see Paul's using that same metaphor about watchfulness as opposed to drunkenness of, hey, it's late, let's have a glass of wine and then go to bed. And so there's that sense of.
Can you repeat the text?
That was 2 Thessalonians Let me see, just a second. No, 1 Thessalonians
Yeah, that sounds right.
5, I think is good.
And in our passage, we have that too.
Mhm.
Well, we have two slaves. We have one slave who is started to be called the faithful and wise manager. And the master had put him in charge of the group of slaves he has working in his house. And so this is obviously someone in some type of leadership role. And part of what they're supposed to be doing is to give them their allowance of food at the proper time. So if you want to follow that metaphor, it could be a leader of the church who is, meant to provide maybe teaching or support at the right time.
I don't know if I have the right verse, but be sober, be vigilant. The devil roars, seeking whom he may devour. Is that James, I think.
That's another one, which would sober and alert contrast with kind of like falling into temptation, which is personified by this lion devil image. So who? Okay, so we have these two slaves. One slave, this person that's put in charge, this leadership role, he'll be blessed. He or she will be blessed if the master comes and finds him at work when he returns. Or finds him doing this. And that's referring to staying awake, giving people their proper food allotment at the proper time. And he says, I tell you the truth, the master will put him in charge of all his possessions. So this is a different reward. The first parable, you remember, the master was going to then sit him down at the table and start serving him. And what else was that? Yeah. And here, he's going to get promoted, basically. He's going to go from being in charge of all the group of slaves for the house to kind of being in charge of the whole house and everything that might entail. I don't know, property deeds. It's a bigger thing.
I remember, sorry, can I just go back slightly? I'm a bit confused about these masters and slaves and so on, because
Okay.
if we go back to 37, happy are those slaves whose master finds them alert when he comes.
Right.
And then I tell you, he will prepare himself and have them recline at table. And I remember, I think it's Roberto who did an amazing preaching on this not very long ago, but was really implying it's the Lord himself. We're waiting for this master to come, the groom coming from the wedding feast. Right. And it's the Lord himself who's going to basically serve them at table.
Right.
And that's
He's going to gird himself, by the way. The Lord is going to gird himself. Perizosete. He's going to get himself wrapped and ready to
serve. Yeah.
To do some hard labor. So there's slightly different contexts, and that's the interesting thing, because here you just have, in general, you have two options. Either you're a slave who stays alert, or you're a slave who doesn't stay alert. And the one who stays alert gets waited on by the master.
Oh, right.
In the second option, though, remember, this is the answer to Peter's question. He says, wait, who are you telling this to? Is it just us? Is it our disciples? Or is it everyone? And then he basically hints like, well, especially for you guys. So he starts talking about this faithful and wise manager who the master puts in charge of his household. And so I think he's implying that would be the Peter type and others among the disciples who, when Jesus leaves, he gives the keys of the kingdom. He's putting them in charge of his household, which would be the church, the ecclesia, the community. And they're meant to give an allowance of food at the proper time. And so wonderful. If you're doing that, you're doing the right thing when he returns, good. And then you'll get a promotion. But if the slave should say to himself, my master is delayed in returning, and he begins to beat the other slaves, both men and women, and to eat, drink, and get drunk. And here we have that contrast again. So now it's not just being alert and sleeping, it's, downright bad, eating to excess, drinking to excess, getting drunk, kind of numbing yourself. Then the master of that slave will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour he does not foresee, and will cut him in two. I just like to cut something in half, which is quite a bit stronger of a punishment than anything else in this context. And he'll be assigned a place with the unfaithful. And then this is a good translation, of course. Apiston, you could say, is either unfaithful or unbelievers. Either of those are correct. Maybe we have a different feel when we hear one word or the other, but maybe they're the same. It's definitely a place you don't want to be. That servant who knew his master's will but did not get ready or do what his master asked will receive a severe beating. So I don't know, is this a second category or the same category? Because the guy who got cut in two, I don't think it would bother him to be beaten after that. He's pretty much gone. But his problem was that he was abusing the other slaves. That was the worst problem. And then we have this slave who knew that the master he knew what the master wanted him to do, but he didn't actually do it. And he's going to get a severe beating. But the one who did not know his master's will and did things worthy of punishment will receive a light beating. So we have a picture of three punishments. And Jesus, again, is answering Peter. So when Peter's saying, is this for us or for everyone? He's basically saying, well, yeah, it's for both. It's for you and for everyone. Just depending who you are going to be treated differently. The more responsibility you have and the more you know God, the closer you have been to God, and you have his word, you have the information, the more that it's going to be expected of you to actually do it. Whereas somebody who didn't have that relationship and didn't know God's will, they're still going to get a little beating, but it's light. And again, we're coming from a world where we don't beat slaves at all. At least I'm coming from that world. I know some places on the planet still do, but our framework is like, this is not acceptable. It's not something we're used to seeing, and we certainly wouldn't use it as a metaphor because it would be, abusive and terrible.
But the punchline is the end of 48, isn't it? From everyone given much, much will be required, and from the one from whom more is provided, all the more will they ask of him. So yeah. It doesn't really matter where you come on the continuum. You'll get, if you already know a lot and you've decided to beat up those below you because after all he didn't turn up on time, or he got delayed, or we gave up thinking about it, or whatever it happens to be, and we just go on, I don't know, abusing those with us or below us or whoever it happens to be. Mm-hmm. But the issue is, for all of us, everyone who's given much, what we'll turn it around the other way. Something is, we are required to return back what we've been given.
Right.
Isn't that right?
Even more. The hint is even more than we've been given.
Yeah.
Because, and it's like the parable of the talents. Like, you've been given potential essentially, and you're expected to actually produce something with it. So you're not given a block of gold that you go and bury. You're actually given something to develop and work with and make something out of.
You've got to
use your talent. Use what you have. We and our characters and our talents, yeah.
But it's interesting here that, in the first picture, we have this contrast of being alert and just ready to answer that door, as opposed to falling asleep. That's one way of looking at it. But then in the second paragraph, you have a much more ongoing scene where it's not something in the middle of the night. This is a day in, day out thing. Like the master isn't coming back for a long time. And now the people with power start to get, they start to get complacent. They feel like they can do anything because the master must not care because he's not coming back, kind of thing. And I can treat other people the way I feel like it, or, you know, what I feel like in the moment.
Sharon?
And so it's affecting their actions and their character in terms of not only eating and drinking, getting drunk, but then also abusing other people that they shouldn't be. Yeah. You had a question? Someone had a question?
Yes, Sharon, I just, as you said, there are categories here. I've got them down as the most serious one is the abuse of position, taking advantage of your position. Secondly, it's disobedience. Thirdly, it's ignorance.
Yeah.
Those three categories, and they go from serious to not so serious, but they're still, you know, they need an appropriate punishment.
Right. Right. And yeah, if our world would take in that one, that would be great. Because the abuse of power is very, very easy, even among slaves. And obviously in this metaphor, we're all slaves, we're all fellow slaves, and God is the master. But in human society, there are different statuses and there are different levels of power that people have. So even among us, among the followers of Jesus, there are power plays and there could be potentially abuses of power. And there certainly are, you know. And
what was Rod's middle one? We've got abuse of power was and the third one was ignorance. What was the middle one?
Disobedience.
Oh, disobedience.
Yeah.
And another point to notice, it's how the slave is being judged is based on how he's treating other slaves. That's very clear. And so yes, I mean, there's possessions and whatnot, but what really matters is how you're treating the slaves. And in the one that's doing a good job is giving everyone their proper portion at the right day, the right time. You think about the Lord's Prayer, you know, give us this day our daily bread. Like we kind of need a good pacing and take care of daily provisions. And then the other is getting drunk and eating too much. So presumably they're not giving it to other people. They're hoarding it all themselves and they don't care about the other people. And so, and they go to the extent of beating the other people. But it just struck me how it's all dependent on how that slave is, which is a metaphor for the leader, is treating other people. So that definitely stood out to me.
One passage that it reminds me of is in Ezekiel 34. It talks about the leaders of Israel as bad shepherds, and you know that God will seek out his sheep. And of course, we all think of that lovely image and Jesus' parables about that. But it kind of surprises me when Jesus kind of shifts the metaphor in verse 17, and he says, behold, I judge between sheep and sheep, between rams and male goats. And then it talks about the sheep that tread down and mud. They tread down the pasture and they muddy the water. And it sounds like they're the fat sheep that are pushing around the lean sheep. Or it sounds kind of that even though he's rescuing some of them, he's still going to judge among those he's rescued.
Right. Yeah. And of course, leadership gets a more strict judgment because you had more sway. You could have done something differently. Where depending where you are in the pecking order, you know, some of us don't have a lot of power to sway things one way or another. But if you do and you abuse it, that's even worse. But I think wherever we are, though, there's always going to be someone under us and someone over us. You know, whether it's a younger generation under us or, you know, whatever it is in your church. I mean, age obviously sets standards. Could be wealth, it could be status or jobs, whatever it is. There's always people under you and over you. And, you know, how are you using the power that you have? You know, are you abusing people with it? Or are
To
you
quote Bob Dylan, you got to
taking
serve
care of-
somebody.
Yep, you got to serve somebody. Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
there's also, I think, a false humility
Mhm.
which says, well, I'm nothing. I'm not a leader. I'm not in any sort of power. I'm just a man in the pew, whatever it happens to be.
Right.
And that is actually an abdication of responsibility for, I don't know, taking care of somebody else, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, you know, you think about this image of falling asleep, you're tuning out to the world.
Yeah, that's the same thing, isn't
Or,
it?
you know, when you become numb to other people's pain, you just kind of like, oh yeah, I know they're struggling, but it's not my problem kind of thing. In a sense, that's like falling asleep as well. Where if you're alert and you're ready for action, you're like, oh, I see, you know, you have a problem over there. I want to come help. And so these whole metaphors can play out day in and day out all the time.
You're observant and on the ball.
Interaction. Sorry, say that again?
You're observant and on the ball.
Right, exactly. Observant on the ball.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it does require being observant.
Yeah.
If you just sit around and kind of wait for something to fall in your lap, you're not going to be noticing all around you and how you can be helpful. And it is very interesting to me that many Christians who are most interested in the second coming, in my view, are slipping into this kind of temptation of, you know, put the blinders on, like tune out everything out there. Let me just stay in my little hut and focus on right here and wait. You know, I'm going to wait like this. But it's exactly the opposite of what I see in this parable, that you should carry on with normal life. Do exactly what you're supposed to be doing and don't stop for a second. You know, be ready to act, be ready to take care of that other person, and never stop doing the job that you were given. So,
Because through the many false prophets, it said, we know the day, this is the day, this and this and that. But
right.
I was thinking about being alert and putting on the armor of God. How to take, somebody said, why did you ever take the armor off? Be alert, be ready.
Well, there you go.
Right.
It's hard
Right.
to sleep in armor. So
It is
there
hard
you
to
go.
sleep in armor. And, you know, I love sleep, and I think it is good. It's a gift from God. We have a proverb that says that as well, or is it just Proverbs?
I mean, you yeah.
Yeah, but in this metaphor, it's not the good
Can't
position.
do it all the time.
It's a form of complacency,
Yeah,
isn't it now? And I kind of equate that to the one-talent Christians. You know, you mentioned the talents earlier. Those that were blessed with loads and went and made a profit and so on, as it went down to those who said, we're only a one-talent Christian now, we can't do that much. I remember hearing Derek Prince say, well, if you're only, you think, a one-talent Christian, invest it in those who are 5 and 10 talent Christians, so they can become 10 and 15 talent Christians. Invest it. But don't think to the level of complacency. And as you said, Sharon, blinkered. I'm set in my little zone here. I can't do anything.
Yeah.
I feel, it's Shira speaking, I'll put my camera on. I feel very much so during this COVID year here in the UK, a lot of the believers or Christians, as they call themselves, are doing exactly that. They've locked themselves up for a year and they're scared. They're really scared, and they haven't been a light like other believers going out and really helping those in need. They're not preparing, they're hiding, and that and I feel very much that's what it's done to a lot of my friends here in the UK.
You know, I would say in, let's say, America, I haven't lived in the UK, but I'm guessing that most places in the West, they're so used to a level of safety and comfort in their life that they're so afraid to lose that. And it's natural maybe, but it's like it's become an idol that even followers of Jesus, they think that they are entitled to complete safety and complete comfort all the time. And you know, the rest of the world has no such illusions. It's like it's hard to exist, you know. And
it's also true to say that if this is, I mean, it's not written in the context of the Lord's second coming, but it very clearly is about that. And if that is not as part of one's consciousness, you know, it's not, I mean, there's one group that is always talking about, are we going to get raptured? Is the Lord going to come? We're living in the last days. Israel's back in the land, and so on. That's one group, which is ever so blinkered, looking only like that. But there's another group that thinks it's totally irrelevant, and that, you know, it's never happened. And, you know, they've been talking about it for 2,000 years. And, you know, maybe it's just a methodical, and it's not part of, basically, of traditional church teaching. There's a famous line in the Mass, I think, about, you know, Christ, the Lord will come, Lord is coming again. I can't remember how it goes. Very powerful. And I remember hearing that for the first time. And this was in a Catholic Mass somewhere, maybe in Italy. But it's not part of, hey, the Lord is going to come back. And we don't know when he's going to come back. And, you know, maybe he's delayed. Maybe he's going to come in the middle of the night. Maybe we don't quite know when he's going to come back, but we've got to be ready. But it's got to be part of our thinking. And if that's the case, then the fears about not having our creature comforts and not having all the securities of COVID or whatever it is, I would have thought reduce a bit, because, you know, the Lord's got, the thing is in control. He's in control. And all he tells us to do is stay awake.
It should. I think anybody who's strong, it's just hard not to depend on strength, right? So if you have strength in this sense, maybe if you have comfort or wealth to a certain level, if you're comparing to the whole world, it's very hard not to depend on that. You know, it's not the natural thing. The people who are weak don't depend on their strength because they're not strong. So they don't have a hard time with that because it's obvious. It's the people who are strong that have to make an effort not to depend on their strength. So it's the people who have comfort, and comfort's not a bad thing, but you know, you can become lulled into numbness.
I have a what it strikes me, you're talking about watchfulness and vigilance, and there are degrees. There's, as Gemma's pointing out, there's some people who go into the very complacent. Oh, he's not coming. That's, you know, we've been talking about that. But you can also be panicky, and, you know, and I guess you could say that would be like huddling down for a year and sawing off your shotgun and buying up all the toilet paper in your county and making sure that you.
It very specifically says, like, if you're trying to anticipate it's coming, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to carry on doing exactly what he told you to do, which is, you know, feed people, whether it's, you know, you're in a leadership position and you're teaching, or whether it's, you know, physically, like whatever it is that he's told you to do, you do exactly that.
The old fable says, if you know he's coming tomorrow, plant a tree.
Well, there you go. But do it well. And this actually, I think that he's, you know, the first part where he talks about the servant who is faithful with what he, you know, and he sees him doing exactly what he's supposed to do. He's given charge over all his possessions. I assume he's thinking exactly of Joseph, who the Lord, Lord is with him, and then Potiphar puts him over his house, and then he's in jail, and then Pharaoh finally puts him over his kingdom, and so he actually has the big job of trying to save enough grain to keep the Egypt and the whole
And giving
darn
people
world.
their food at its time. Exactly.
That's right. He gave the people food at his time, and he did so. He fed the whole world.
Yeah.
So yes. So he did not did not just sit back. He worked and kept working, even at the end. Yeah.
Yes. So may we all stay awake and alert, and not alert in a scared way, but simply anticipating that the master could come at any moment, and we need to just do what he tells us to do consistently and be faithful with the resources he's given us.